On a sweltering afternoon on July 11, 2023, in Stewart, Martin County, Florida, an unusual incident occurred on the city's streets. A drunk driver, exhibiting erratic and dangerous behavior, caught the attention of the police. After receiving reports from citizens about a car swerving across the road, officers from the Martin County Sheriff's Office quickly arrived at the scene, only to discover an unexpected situation. A drunken woman not only lost control of her vehicle, but also started berating herself, despite no one having criticized her. The story began when Dina's car hit a rock and came to a stop in a parking lot. The driver in question was none other than Dina, a 41-year-old woman, who could easily be described as already drunk since waking up, a phrase that creates a powerful image of her character. She was not just a person who drank excessively. She had made it a habit to wake up and continue life as if nothing around her was amiss. Dina could be portrayed as someone who lives life in a rush, indifferent to the consequences of her actions. The image of drunk since waking up paints a picture of a woman who starts her day with a strong drink, forgetting the weight of her problems and struggles. This passage delves into the deep emotional turmoil and internal chaos that Dina is grappling with. The line "she couldn't even remember how many drinks she had" is powerful, because it not only exposes the extent of her drunkenness, but also gives us insight into her psychological state. The fact that she cannot recall how much she drank suggests that her drinking has become a coping mechanism, an unconscious escape from the weight of her reality. It is as if the alcohol has blurred her ability to keep track of time and actions, symbolizing her numb response to a life that has perhaps grown too difficult to face sober. We could expand this by exploring Dina's backstory. She might have experienced a series of personal tragedies, such as a failed marriage, the loss of a loved one, or the collapse of dreams she once had. Her drinking could be the result of accumulated pain, each drink a desperate attempt to quiet the ache inside her. Imagine her looking back at her younger self, filled with ambition and hope, but now, at 41, she's surrounded by the broken remnants of her past. The act of drinking is not just about forgetting but about trying to silence the voice that keeps reminding her of everything that went wrong. Her inability to remember could be seen as a subtle form of self-destruction. She doesn't want to remember because doing so would mean facing the consequences of her choices, the broken promises, and the disappointments. In this context, the next moment, when she swerved across the road, becomes a metaphor for Dina's life spiraling out of control. The erratic driving is not just a physical manifestation of her intoxication, but also a deeper reflection of how she is navigating her existence. Her inability to steer the car mirrors her inability to steer her life. Dina might have once had dreams of stability, success, or love, but somewhere along the way, those dreams became blurry, like the road she now drifts across. The metaphorical swerve hints at past decisions, perhaps reckless or impulsive choices that, like her driving, lack direction and clarity. She is no longer in control, neither of her actions nor her emotions, and this lack of control extends beyond the car into every aspect of her life. The road, which in the beginning might have seemed like a straightforward path, now symbolizes her confusion. The vehicles she passes could represent her past mistakes, moving forward but at a speed she cannot match. These cars might also symbolize the lives of others, people who are moving forward, making their way with purpose, while Dina remains lost, drifting between these fleeting moments of clarity and confusion. She might see them as distant, disconnected from her, unable to grasp the steady rhythm they seem to follow. To deepen the impact of this moment, we could also consider her thoughts and emotions during this erratic driving. Perhaps, as she swerves across the road, her mind flashes to moments in her past, the faces of people she loved and lost, the times she tried to build a future but somehow failed, or the haunting realization that she has spent too much time running from herself. This inner turmoil could add a layer of desperation to the scene. Dina might briefly wonder how it all went wrong, why she feels so detached from everything around her. Her driving might become erratic not just because of the alcohol, but because she's lost in the tangled mess of these reflections, too tired to steer herself back to a place of certainty. The swerving car also represents the unpredictability of Dina's life. There is no clear path forward, just a constant feeling of being pulled in different directions, unsure of which way to go. The traffic she passes, full of orderly drivers, might seem like a cruel contrast to her chaotic existence. They appear to have direction, purpose, and control, things Dina has long since lost, or perhaps never really had. The image of the swerving car thus captures both the literal danger of her impaired driving and the figurative danger of her emotional state, where every decision feels like a gamble, and every move is unpredictable. In the larger context, Dina's behavior behind the wheel is a cry for help, a form of rebellion against a life that has worn her down. She doesn't want to be the person she's become, but she doesn't know how to stop, or if she even has the strength to. The metaphor of the car and the row is just as much about her physical decline as it is about her emotional breakdown. The moment she swerves across the road could be the tipping point, the moment when she realizes that she's lost control completely, both of her life and her own sense of self. In this passage, the moment when Dina's car crashes into the rock is a stark turning point, both literally and metaphorically. The crash is not just a physical collision, but also the culmination of Dina's chaotic and self-destructive behavior. The image of the car slamming into a rock is laden with symbolism, representing the ultimate barrier that Dina cannot avoid, no matter how much she tries to escape. The rock, unyielding and immovable, symbolizes an obstacle in her life that she has failed to overcome. This could represent a culmination of her unresolved issues, her inability to face the consequences of her actions, her refusal to acknowledge the damage she's causing to herself and others, or perhaps a deeper existential crisis she's in trying to outrun through alcohol. The fact that the car slid onto the sidewalk and came to a stop is significant. It's as though the world itself is trying to bring Dina to a halt, to force her to confront what she's been running from. The sidewalk is a symbol of public space. No longer can she hide her self-destructive journey within the privacy of her own mind or the anonymity of the road. Now, she is exposed. The sidewalk, where people walk, becomes a place where her actions are seen and the consequences of her choices are undeniable. The way the car comes to a halt could suggest that, at least for now, her journey of escape is over. It's as if life is giving her a final, jarring warning. She has come to the end of her path. Expanding on Dina's backstory, this could be a moment when all of her past failures, fears, and unaddressed trauma come crashing down on her. Perhaps she has lived a life of avoidance, always running from responsibility and her past mistakes, using alcohol as a way to cope. But this crash is the moment when reality catches up to her. The rock, imposing and unyielding, could represent a key turning point in Dina's life, a particular event or a realization that she can no longer avoid. It might be her rock bottom moment, the instant when the consequences of her actions are too large to ignore. Dina, in that split second before the crash, might have realized that she has run out of road, that there is no escaping herself anymore. The police arriving at the scene further highlights the aftermath of Dina's crash, but it's more than just the arrival of authority figures. It's the appearance of the inevitable reckoning she has been avoiding. The strong smell of alcohol is not merely a sensory detail, but a reflection of Dina's own state of being. When the police describe it as like the smell of a bar that forgot to clean up after closing, the comparison is jarring and vivid. It suggests a mess that is not only physical, but emotional and psychological as well. Just as a bar left unclean after a night of revelry reflects a lack of care or responsibility, the lingering stench of alcohol in Dina's car speaks to her inability to face the consequences of her life choices. It suggests neglect not just of her surroundings, but of herself. The metaphor of a bar that hasn't been cleaned after closing goes even further, evoking the idea of things left in disarray, of time running out. The bar, like Dina's life, is past the point of redemption. The smell of alcohol is no longer the warm, inviting scent of a good time, but a sharp reminder of wasted potential, missed opportunities, and a life lived in disarray. This is the life Dina has led for some time now, one where the cycle of drinking, avoiding, and numbing her pain has left her too exhausted to maintain any semblance of order or direction. Just as the bar sits in the aftermath of a long night of revelry, Dina finds herself in the morning after, surrounded by the wreckage of choices that have led her to this moment. Expanding on Dina's internal state, we could imagine her feeling a deep sense of regret in that moment when the police arrive. The smell of alcohol is a direct representation of her self-destructive tendencies, and it's almost as though her actions have physically manifested in the world around her. Dina might have been trying to hold on to a sense of control by pushing through her problems with alcohol, but now the consequences are unavoidable. The scene reflects a life that's been left to decay, much like the bar that never got cleaned. This isn't just about a messy car or the lingering smell, it's a metaphor for a life that has been left in disrepair. Dina has reached a point where even her own self-deception can no longer shield her from the truth. As the police assess the scene, they could be representing the society that Dina has always tried to avoid, the structure, the rules, the consequences that she's been running from. The image of the police seeing the unkempt bar-like stench is an indication that she cannot outrun her problems forever. The mess she has created in her life is now too obvious to ignore. No longer able to hide behind the alcohol, Dina faces the truth of her self-destruction, and it is in this moment that her carefully constructed facade begins to crumble. To deepen Dina's character, we could explore her internal thoughts as she waits for the police to arrive. Maybe she feels a brief flash of clarity. She knows she's hit rock bottom. Maybe she feels ashamed or humiliated, but there could also be a moment of realization, a fleeting thought that perhaps she's been using alcohol as a crutch to avoid something much deeper. She could think about the friends she's lost, the relationships she's damaged, or the person she could have been if she hadn't taken this path. This could be a critical moment of reflection for her, where the fog of intoxication briefly lifts, and she sees the wreckage of her life clearly for the first time. In this expanded version, the crash and the smell of alcohol become more than just narrative details. They serve as potent metaphors for Dina's emotional and psychological state. The crash into the rock symbolizes a moment of finality, the moment when the consequences of a lifetime of poor choices can no longer be avoided, and the smell of alcohol speaks to the messiness, exhaustion, and hopelessness of a life in disarray. Dina's journey has brought her to this point, and now she must face the wreckage, both literal and metaphorical, that she has created. Dina was a woman with a simple appearance, but a closer look would reveal the signs of a difficult life. She had long, slightly curly brown hair, often let loose after a stressful day. Her eyes were usually bloodshot from lack of sleep and tears, sometimes because of the bitter taste of alcohol. She used to be a strong woman, but now her gaze seemed like that of someone who had given up on any hope. A former friend once said that Dina had the ability to make those around her feel at ease, but once she fell into the spiral of alcohol, all that remained was an unspoken loneliness. Dina was not a bad person, but at this moment, she represented someone struggling with herself, trying to escape from the painful past she could not face. She no longer remembered how many drinks she had, but if anyone asked, she would surely admit she drank too much to forget things no woman like her could bear. When the police asked Dina to present her papers, she not only failed to do so but innocently asked, "What are papers?" At that moment, her eyes were glazed over, unable to focus on any one object for too long, and her hands fumbled through her wallet as though it were an endless pit. The officers couldn't help but wonder as they watched her search fruitlessly, finding only a few bowling club cards, items clearly irrelevant for traffic. Her wallet contained no driver's license, no vehicle registration, and not even an insurance card. Indeed, she was an incompetent driver, but she had a remarkable talent for causing trouble and making things unnecessarily complicated. Dina continued to mumble, her eyes not focused on the police officer, but instead scanning around. Her voice was slurred and unclear. "You think I'm not smart enough to drive? I've been doing it for over 10 years. She looked back at her car, almost as if trying to comfort herself after nearly sending the entire sidewalk flying from the crash with a rock. At this point, the police were unsure whether to worry about her being drunk or the fact that her words were so disjointed that no one could understand them. They were concerned not because of her physical or mental health, but because if she had been driving for over 10 years without being caught, who knew how many others had suffered through such dangerous trips? Dina didn't just show a lack of cooperation. She seemed to be in an extreme state of confusion. Her hair was a mess, her face flushed from the alcohol, and her hands trembled as she fumbled through her wallet for something. She had no awareness that she had caused a huge disturbance on the road, instead focused on her useless cards. From her clumsy actions, it was clear. Dina was not just drunk, but was sinking into a fog of unclear thoughts, completely disoriented. When asked to take a breathalyzer test, Dina looked at the officer as if they had asked her to solve a harder puzzle than fixing her financial problems. She glared at him with a haughty expression, refusing as though it was a challenge she couldn't or didn't want to face. "I'm not taking this test," she sighed, her voice floating as if she had just come out of a fancy meeting. "I can tell for myself if I'm drunk." "And the answer is ... clearly not." She gave a dismissive look, even though her body told a completely different story. Her steps were unsteady, and her eyes were so blurry she couldn't even distinguish the surroundings. The officers couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between her words and her condition. Her legs wobbled as if a gentle breeze could knock her over, and her eyes had lost the sharpness of sobriety. Dina's words became more and more incoherent, as if she were deceiving herself to hide the truth. She continued to squirm, trying to stay upright, but each movement only confirmed the undeniable truth. She was drunk. "It's nothing," she tried to say. "I'm fine. Just too hot." However, at that moment, the police could no longer stay silent. They conducted a breathalyzer test, and the results not only confirmed her intoxication, but also revealed that her legal situation was just as bad. The police confirmed that not only did Dina not have a driver's license, but the car she was driving wasn't registered either. A driver with no license, driving an unregistered car, and refusing to cooperate with the test. It was truly a perfect case for an accident story that anyone on the road would want to avoid. By this point, Dina seemed to have lost all control, not just over her body but over everything around her. In her mind, perhaps everything was still clear. She was just challenging the police and believed she was sober enough to drive. But in reality, in this world filled with wrong decisions, Dina had created a scenario that might be amusing to others, but was full of pain for herself. As the police proceeded to arrest her, a strange shift began to occur. At first, she maintained her sulky attitude, but then she began to criticize herself frantically, as though her words were the only way to calm her own anger. "How stupid! Why did I drive like this? Why didn't I call a taxi? I definitely deserve to be arrested," she yelled, each self-reproach full of confusion and rage. Her words were not just self-criticism. They seemed like a challenge to the world around her, as if the police were merely witnesses to a tragic play in which she was the lead actor. Dina continued muttering to herself as if she were lamenting in front of a mirror, berating herself to the point that she didn't realize she was creating instability for everyone around her. She kept asking herself, "Why did I do that?" as though she hadn't fully sobered up from her drunken state. These questions grew more disjointed and confusing, making it impossible for anyone to tell whether they came from a sober person or one completely out of control. The officers nearby couldn't help but sigh. They were beginning to feel awkward, not because they were dealing with a drunk person, but because they didn't know what to do with this bizarre situation. After a while, one officer couldn't hold back and quietly discussed with a colleague, "Should we call a psychologist? She's criticizing herself like this. It doesn't seem right." They watched Dina, who stood there as a mess of emotions, tears and self-blame pouring out uncontrollably. It seemed that her self-criticism wasn't just ordinary regret, but might be a sign of something deeper, an inability to confront her own life with repeated wrong decisions she couldn't escape from. In Dina's mind, everything was starting to blur. She no longer saw herself as a failure, but she felt like she was inconveniencing others, especially those trying to do their job. She imagined the police officers were tired, complaining about handling a case like this, but no one except her understood the pain and confusion in her mind. Dina began to cry, not because she was afraid or worried about what would happen next, but because of a total sense of powerlessness. She felt like a lost bird, unsure how to escape this situation. Meanwhile, the police stood there, equally helpless, unsure how to help her, other than waiting for the arrival of a doctor or necessary medical solutions. The situation grew even more unclear as Dina seemed unable to stop. Her self-recriminations kept pouring out as if she was punishing herself for the mistakes she had made, even though she couldn't change anything at that moment. Eventually, after a series of strange reactions and bizarre behavior, Dina was arrested on several serious charges: driving under the influence, refusing a breathalyzer test, driving without a license, and driving an unregistered vehicle. When investigators confirmed her condition, they couldn't help but sigh. The ridiculousness and complete lack of responsibility in Dina's actions had created a situation so severe that she now faced a bail amount of $150,000, a considerable sum. The investigators had to admit that the level of incredible in her actions warranted such a bail, not only because of her dangerous driving but also due to the severe irresponsibility with which she treated herself and society. While sitting in the holding cell, Dina seemed still unable to sober up. She sat quietly, her arms crossed, her gaze empty as she stared out the window. The feeling of drunkenness still lingered in her body, but now it wasn't just the intoxication. It was a dizziness, as if a large mirror had shattered, reflecting all the truths Dina had avoided facing. She began to ask herself, in a contradictory way, did I drink too much, or am I just struggling to get along with myself? This question echoed in her mind, but there was no clear answer. At 41 years old, Dina had lived a life far from easy. She had once dreamed of a stable job and a happy family, but those things had slipped away due to thoughtless decisions and a life dominated by late nights drinking, tired mornings, and unresolved emotions. She had once thought that the drinks helped her forget everything, but now, sitting in the holding cell, those decisions had become an inescapable burden. The image of herself in the mirror, as she looked into the broken glass of her past, gradually appeared as a cruel joke. Dina suddenly realized that refusing the breathalyzer, refusing to face the consequences of her actions, wasn't rebellion, it was a way to protect herself from the truth. She chastised herself, as if by not realizing what she was doing, by not being aware of everything, maybe things would be better. Her eyes became hazy, and the images of lonely nights, painful mornings, and she couldn't even remember what she had done the night before, all seemed to return like a nightmare. She wondered if she could change. Was it really too late to turn back? And when self-criticism became a habit, would it ever stop? She looked down at her hands, and in that moment, everything around her seemed to fall silent. She realized that her life was slipping away meaninglessly, like the car she had driven while drunk, directionless, unregistered, unable to control her own actions. And now, everything was out of control, as she faced serious charges, a huge deal, and unresolved questions about her life. Perhaps, the only thing Dina could do now was to look at her mistakes and ask herself, what can I do to stop falling into this endless cycle? Finally, when Dina sat in the holding cell, she was no longer just a drunken woman with poor decisions, but a person confronting herself, the consequences of thoughtless actions, and a life out of control. Her self-criticism wasn't a confession, but an internal dialogue, an effort to find a reason for everything. But no matter how much she blamed herself, nothing could change the past, and she realized that true change could only come when she faced herself and corrected her mistakes. Dina's story is a lesson reminding us that sometimes life doesn't go as planned, but how we confront our mistakes is the most important thing. Self-blame doesn't help unless it's accompanied by real action to change. Every mistake is an opportunity to learn, and instead of avoiding or ignoring them, we need to face them and find ways to fix them. So, the lesson here is, don't let alcohol, failure, or past mistakes dictate your actions and decisions.